Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments on bicycle travel adventures. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 420th edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. This edition, what if you could tour with just the things that fit in a single dry bag? No panniers, just the essentials. On this episode, we take this as a full-on challenge, borrowing from the Ultralight backpacking folks. We cut our toothbrush handles and weigh every single gram for the Ultralight bikepacking challenge. Hey, this is something that I've maybe changed my mind on. I used to be, if you were with the show years ago, I would make a little bit of fun of people that would be measuring everything. I think the derogatory term back in the day was gram weenies, which is funny, but derogatory at the same time. So I did not use it then, and I just mention it now because I remember it. But the idea here is, hey, weight does ultimately matter. And way back in the day, I just remember the very first time I ever went camping with a bicycle. I had basically car camping gear, and I only had a rack, and I don't even remember if I had panniers. I think I had panniers, but the amount of stuff on the back of my bike was wild, just really wild. So much bulk, so much weight. I remember that I was a big fan of the stove that I called the Green Dragon. It was like literally one of those larger Coleman green propane canisters. And if you're in the state, in North America, at least, I think you know what I'm talking about. And it was great because it boiled water on a flash, but very heavy. It was a solid steel container. And I was a big fan of it. In fact, I think I just relished in the sense of saying, hey, I don't care. I'm putting this stuff on my bike, and weight doesn't matter because weight doesn't matter. And then especially as I've aged a little bit, and I've found that, yes, indeed, carrying a lot of weight does matter. And I've ridden with Mysterious James a couple of times, who has been interested in ultralight backpacking and has gotten some of that gear. It looks a lot easier to ride a bike when there's fewer things that you're carrying, certainly less weights. Ultimately, when all is said and done here, it's curiosity. I'm looking at simplicity. I'm looking at better handling, easier climbing, and testing the limits. One other thing that I remember from the past, and Mysterious James and I have talked about this on the show when he's been a guest before, when we were on one of our early rides on the Pacific Coast, so we're talking 10 plus years ago, we ran into one guy, the viola player who played viola on the Titanic soundtrack. We run into this guy randomly, and he was literally in, and I still don't know how he did it because this is 10 years ago. This was really before ultralight backpacking, but dude was in on a road bike, super skinny tire road bike, and he had a handlebar bag that had everything contained in something that was like maybe 2 grapefruits. I can't even imagine how he got in there, but he was carrying, I've never seen anybody carry less, who had the ability to camp. Clearly he did a whole bunch of things with credit card touring as well, but at the same time, it was remarkable. And we just shook our heads in amazement with him. And now I want to be that guy. So here's the idea here. Rules. One, I'll call it a mid-sized dry bag. We're talking about maybe a 10 to 12 liter size dry bag. I've been using them for a while, and they're usually like this is what my sleep kit stays in. Now the idea is I want everything to go in there. No extra frame or seat bags. I had originally considered this as like a handlebar bag situation, but I think just for ease of simplicity and maybe for packing later, should I ever do this, which I would like to do, it's basically a dry bag that attaches, gets bungeed down to the rack, and that's it. That's the only thing you got. That is it. Those are the rules. Trip assumptions here. We're talking a night or two in a summer or shoulder season. And I think it's more of a shoulder season because I am talking about bringing cooler weather gear, layers. So maybe I should not call this a summer situation. This is a shoulder season situation where it's warm enough, but also has a chance of getting chilly when stopping in camp. Mild weather assumptions, but being ready for rain possibility and cool nights. So nowish for me. Maybe a little earlier though. We are starting here on the East Coast to get temperatures down into the low 40s at night. And that's just a little too cool for this particular trip and the way I put it together. But this works for a good chunk of the year and potentially also through summer as well. In fact, I could leave some stuff that I'm going to be talking about at home with summer. Riding is going to be on paved or mixed surfaces, my typical stuff, moderate daily mileage. That's basically the deal there. So your typical kind of in-season bicycle adventure type of a thing. So I'm going to talk about this in terms of the basics. We're talking shelter. We're talking sleep kit. We're talking about food and cooking or lack of cooking. We're talking clothing and tools. And that's about it. And of course, the waterproof dry bag. That's basically it. I'm going to talk through all of these categories, and then I'm going to tell you where I end up landing. And then at the end of all of this, I'm going to tell you, do I think I can get this in that 10 to 12 liter dry bag? Spoiler alert, I can. And the next question is, how much does it weigh? And when you compare it to other kind of fully loaded touring, it's pretty wild. So again, spoiler on that. Shelter. A bunch of different options in the ultralight space. They tend to be a whole heck of a lot less luxurious than what I'm used to. There are things like Tarp and bivy sacks that are available. So a bivy sack is just essentially a claustrophobia inducing. Think of it this way. Think of it as a sleeping bag for your sleeping bag, or a tarp that can go over it. It's light, it's cheap. You don't have a lot of bug protection from all of that. So that's something to be considering there. Something that you really see a lot in the ultralight backpacking community is a trekking pole setup and some kind of, it's a tarp, but generally speaking, it's a convertible in a bunch of different ways. It can be worn as a poncho. It's your tent. It could also be used in a variety of different ways. I think that the downside of that is it would require carrying additional things that have less value. Now, if this was going to be mixed in with a hiking trip, I think that this is actually a really interesting kind of setup. It's funny, I just recently, as I've been going through some stuff here, found my old trekking poles. Now, I bet you that they are, it's like when you find something from 10 years ago. These may be 20 or 25-year-old trekking poles. I'm sure that they are heavy and nowhere near kind of what the vibes are for today's trekking poles, but it's nice that I've got them. But this is something that I would potentially consider in that kind of scenario. You can also look at something even more almost disposable, emergency bivvies, which really pack up super light, and a bug net. Those would certainly be even lighter, but you do run the risk of easy tears. Emergency bivvies, they're essentially made out of the material that those emergency blankets are made out of, and they rustle a lot. And I should mention that bivvies are really not my jam, just because I do tend to get a little closed in tight spaces, and I just don't care for them very much. But if you're going just on the weight situation, boy, that works out pretty well. You've also got, of course, hammocks, which I've used before, and those come in ultralight varietals as well. I've tended not to be able to sleep very well in them, and that's something I would love to be able to fix. You also have the issue with a hammock that if you don't have trees, if you're not going to someplace with trees or places to hang, it doesn't really work very well. And last but not least, I think the one that you look at pretty closely is an ultralight single wall tent. It can really compress to fit. They sometimes are as light as a pound, including all of the things that you use to raise them up. They are pretty excellent. And I think you see a lot of ultralight hikers using that type of thing. So there's your world. Where do I end up landing? Just randomly, you look at something that's made out of Dyneema, and you don't have a floor typically, and sometimes you'll end up just using a ground sheet. So for the ground sheet, you can cut up just a polycryo sheet, which is the kind of stuff that is used in house siding, like for an ounce and a half. Super cheap, super compact. You cut it to size. And I was looking at the types of Dyneema tents that pack up to fist size, looking at Z-Pack's Hexamid pocket tarp. It's a little over 5 ounces. It's not super awesome in terms of feeling luxurious, but boy, it does work, and it certainly gives you what you need. It protects you from the weather, and between those two things, you're just a hair under 7 ounces. That's pretty wild. You could conceivably add a bug net as well for 3 ounces. Sea to Summit makes one. It's a nano pyramid. That's good if you're in a buggy area, so maybe we'll throw that in if necessary. Stakes. You can go with titanium for these types of things. 6 of those kind of shepherd's hook type stakes are roughly 2 ounces. That's pretty great and necessary for putting up a tent like this. This is not a freestanding tent. And you'll need some guy lines, and you can get some reflective paracord, like 2 millimeter, so super thin. That's going to be about 1 ounce for what I would need. That's also multi-purpose. Use it for repairs, could use it for all sorts of other things. But at the end of the day, where I end up landing with that type of a setup is a 12 ounce. We are under a pound for all of this stuff together. 340 grams for you metric types. That is pretty compelling, and it packs up really super compact. Really amazing. Got to sleep. Got to have a way to sleep. And this is where you can go into a sufferfest mode, or you can have just enough to be able to sleep. The pad is an interesting situation. I am not a big fan of the closed cell foam. Typically, something like a Z-Light, and for Ultralight, it tends to be cut down so that it's only essentially on your torso. Your legs hang off of it, especially in this type of weather. We don't need to worry about being too cold at night. There's also Ultralight inflatables. Neo Air Uberlight is probably the best one there. It's not terribly far off from the one that I use, although it is much lighter, and as a result, with the light inflatables, they do tend to get punctures a lot more easily. And so there's your trade-off. There's a lot of folks in the ultralight community, and I am a beginner to say the least here, that are tired of the punctures and they end up going to the closed cell foam. I'll tell you where I land in a little bit. For the other part of your sleep kit, I have been using sleeping bags for my entire life, basically. I think that I am going to be going to quilts with my next purchase, and I got 2 down sleeping bags that are doing just great for the moment, so that can use them essentially as quilts. But Enlightened Equipment makes a very good one. That's a 40-degree quilt. It is 13 ounces. 13 ounces, and it compresses to effectively the size of a grapefruit. So we're worried about weight, of course, grams, but also how can it pack down? I've got to get it into the same bag as my tent and other things as well. So you really need to be able to compress it down. This quilt does that. Pillows are an optional luxury for some. You could conceivably put things into that dry bag and use that as a pillow. But if you're not carrying a lot of clothes, which we aren't, spoiler alert, you may want to consider an inflatable pillow, and Exped Air makes a really good ultralight one that's considered pretty good. It's on the small side, but it is 1.5 ounces, about 1.6 ounces. That is wild. Again, it is prone to punctures, but again, we just have to be really careful with how things go with all of this. Sleep clothes I'll throw into this because I'm a big fan. Some folks will, and James and I ran into folks like this in some of our campgrounds, I think in California, as memory serves, where dudes were just literally like whatever they wore, they slept in. And no, that's just not a me thing. I do think that sleep clothes and camp clothes are important things just to get out of your gear. You'll be wearing that the next day, of course, the stuff you ride in. So it's going to get hung up and hopefully dry out. Probably won't, but dream a little dream, right? But for sleep clothes, a lightweight merino top and boxer briefs, like I said, doubles as camp wear. You're talking maybe 6 ounces there. So you can see how clothing can add up compared to things like your tent and your sleep kit. But overall, my whole sleep kit is 27 ounces or 765 grams. So a little over a pound. Pretty great. pretty wild how this is shaping up. When it comes to eating, because we got to eat, there are folks in the ultralight space that will bring stove. I think for a 1 to 2 day trip, I think I would go no cook when all is said and done here. I do have the Espit system, which is essentially a pellet-based stove. I think it works pretty well. I'm pretty impressed by it. I used it for a while. I haven't used it in a while, but I think in this context, if I did decide I was going to do a longer trip or I was going to cook or I needed to boil water, I think that's what I would bring. It's honestly just a few ounces to bring along, including those pellets. I'm calling them pellets, but the fuel tablets. Plus the stove's made out of titanium. It's nothing. But when you are cooking, you've also got to bring stuff to cook in, and the weight adds up when all is said and done. So I'd be looking at bars, wraps, and most importantly, a cold soak jar. So that would be something that I think would be really good. From a coffee perspective, because we all got to do coffee, I would do the instant packets. It would not bring the full kit with me. That makes a lot more sense to me than an ultralight brewer, which really is essentially just a pour over mechanism. They're super light. You could do that. But in this model, I'm really trying to pare things down. So you've got not just the weight trade-off, but also the space trade-off. So I think ditch the cook kit for other things. And that other thing is essentially the camp clothes at this point. So where do I end up landing? Most importantly, a cold soak system. A plastic peanut butter jar is about 2 ounces, of course, without the peanut butter in it. You can do a whole lot of things. You can reconstitute couscous and all sorts of different foods in that type of a setup. And couscous is incredibly light. You can rehydrate things that you dehydrate yourself or bring along dehydrated meals and maybe even leave that plastic peanut butter jar at home. I'll bring it along just because I think that's where I would cold brew some coffee for the mornings. Set it up overnight. A utensil, I'd bring a single titanium spoon. That's a 1/2 ounce. I think I would bring a mug. The MSR Titan is 2.5 ounces. That's something good for eating out of, from drinking out of. It would serve a multi-purpose use. And the food for the couple of days would be things like wraps, instant oatmeal, nuts, bars, jerky, and of course the aforementioned instant coffee. I'm estimating that's about 24 ounces there. It's a lot of weight right there. In fact, a lot of bulk. So you'd have to be really smart about what you end up bringing. Again, we're only going to be in a bag that is 10 to 12 liters. And so you got to be really nutrition and calorie dense with things. A lot of ultralight backpackers will actually bring olive oil and a lot of nut butters because it's not just the weight, it is the density, so you can fit it into small spaces. So that actually could be its own entire episode right there, is figuring out what you want to do for food and that type of a setup. For water, I'm going to cheat a little bit here because I think you do need, obviously, a container for water. That's going to be the one thing that I keep out of the bag. I'll have a 1 liter smart water bottle that'll be frame mounted. And depending on my scenario, where the ride is going to be, you may need to bring a water filter as well. I'm going to assume that's not the case for this particular trip. We'll just leave that out. But then you've got a way to carry enough water and refill as necessary. The whole total cooking and food weight, excluding the water, that bottle is negligible weight. It's probably a couple ounces, but it's going to be on the frame anyways. We're looking at about 29 total ounces or 820 grams. That's really representing the bulk of what I am carrying. Clothing and tools. As I mentioned before, I'm not bringing a change of clothes on this one. It's going to be focused on, there's a riding clothing, and then there's camp clothing. The riding clothing is going to include a base layer and a puffy jacket layer. I'm also going to bring a rain shell because I think that's a really big payoff if it does get cooler. A real simple wool beanie. I just got one from, is it -33? I really like their merino wool. I have a lot of it. I wear it all the time, and I just got their hat, and it's quite good, and it's really inexpensive. Now somebody's going to write and tell me that it's not good quality, but I found it's pretty good, and I've enjoyed using their stuff. Micro tool kit, it'll be a multi-tool, a chain link breaker, a tiny pump, a little teeny tiny pump, and a patch kit instead of a spare tube because you get some weight savings there. For hygiene, we're going to bring Dr. Bronner's in a teeny tiny travel bottle, and they make some really good ultralight ones for that, so we're really saving ounces there. A small camp towel, that's it, and a travel toothbrush. I joked earlier about sawing off your toothbrush handles. That's where you find weight savings and bulk savings as well. So I'll join the club there. Where do I end up landing up? I got the rain shell. That could be something like a Patagonia Houdini, or Helium has one as well. We're talking like 6 ounces, super light, folds down, balls up to nothing, very reliable. It doesn't breathe, but if you're trying to stay dry in a sudden downpour, boy, that can be really helpful. Insulation layer, there's all sorts of really light puffies out there, but if you're looking for one that packs down really well, Montbell Plasma is a decent one I've seen. These are, by the way, super expensive compared to your Amazon specials, so you are getting into those trade-offs of weight and volume. If you want something that's super on the ultralight side, you are going to pay for it. So this all really adds up here. An extra base layer in socks. I'll have the merino wool top layer. Socks, we're talking about 5 ounces there. That's the camp clothing. And so maybe I'm double counting, I'm realizing now, for my camp clothing in here. Toiletries, I'd mentioned before, toothbrush, a little thing of toothpaste. You could use Dr. Bronner's as your toothpaste. I've done it before. It's not great, but if you really want to save, you could do that. They also make these chewable versions, so you don't have to bring a little tube. Interesting choice there. You could bring some wet wipes and just have a few of them in a Ziploc. Really minimalist hygiene situation here. It just adds up to a very small amount. I'll bring a headlamp, and they make some ultralight ones. Nightcore has one, and it's like an ounce. It's basically just little mini bungees. It's wild. It's USB rechargeable. All in all, we're talking 20 ounces, 570 grams for all of this stuff. So really pretty wild there. I think that is... Oh, I should mention the mini pump. Chain link tool, got to bring your phone and your power bank, and of course your wallet, and you could really slim down your wallet. Total tools and miscellaneous weight is another 13 ounces or 370 grams. And that's everything. I'll get to the final weight total in a minute here, but let's talk about the game of Tetris that you have to play when you're packing your dry bag. When all is said and done, it is tricky to get all of this in, but it can be done. I'm looking forward to, should I do this, to maybe doing a video or otherwise just showing this. But here's my thought process with this. At the very bottom of the bag goes the sleep system. We're talking the quilt and the uninflated, obviously, pad. I think that if you're doing a closed cell foam pad, that would end up on the outside of the bike or outside of the bag. It would go underneath the dry bag as it's cinched down on your rack. So you could find some volume savings there. In the middle of the bag, we're talking the shelter, the tarp, the bug net, if that's going in as well. That really gets in there. So that now we've occupied probably a good solid half of the whole thing. So the rest of it, the top, is going to be food and clothing. If I did bring camp shoes, which I didn't include in the total here, those will go on the outside. The rain shell doesn't need to go in there. That could go on the outside. Anything that's waterproof or wet, subsequently wet, can go on the outside. So we are cheating a little bit ultimately by getting into this one bag, but the bag was a method of paring things down. But that's how the packing Tetris ends up going. When you're carrying this few things, I should take a moment before we get to the grand total here. You got to be considering safety and bailout. If you're not carrying all of the stuff that you're normally used to, you've got to have an emergency bailout plan. That's where your credit card comes in. You've got to be someplace where you can get out as necessary. If the weather's just too bad, you're talking a roofed lodging situation, maybe even a ride share, maybe a transit option like on the Oregon coast, like what we had. So you got to be thinking ahead a little bit there. To be perfectly honest, this is everything that I think I need. And this was the really big surprising takeaway for me, is that sort of, okay, I've got my tools, I got my phone, I got my power bank, I've got my communication, I got my maps. This is all I need. Is it as comfortable though? No, definitively not. But it's pretty great. And for a couple of days, this works really well. You also got to give yourself a chance to veto based on weather. I am looking outside right now here where I'm at in West Virginia, and it's a cool, almost a little too chilly beginning to the day here, but it's going to be beautiful and awesome, and that's a perfect day for this type of a thing. I'm thinking about what's going on in Seattle right now, and it is raining and windy and nasty, and this becomes a lot less fun in those types of conditions. So I think you got to give yourself a weather veto on all of that. All right. Here we go. What's the drum roll here on my hypothetical packed total? We're gonna assume I can get this into the 10 to 12 liter dry bag. I think it can. I would be really curious if any of you do this type of thing, and could you get it into that small of a bag? Obviously, of course, you would get the bag that fits all of this stuff. Grand total here. We got 12 ounces for the shelter situation. We've got 27 ounces for the sleep kit. We've got 29 ounces for cooking and food. We've got 20 ounces for clothing and personal. We're at 13 total ounces for tools and other miscellaneous things. I may have, like I said, double counted my sleep/camp clothes, but let's just go with it. That is a total of 2.86 kilograms or 6.31 pounds inside that dry bag. That is remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. I carry so much more weight than that. It's just, I think about lifting up my panniers when I am putting them into my duffel as I check the duffel for my trips going to wherever I'm going. And it is so much, it's multiple times that weight. And it really gets you thinking from a minimalist standpoint, for a comfort standpoint, in terms of the riding, how much better would your ride be if you were only hauling yourself and 6.5 pounds, just shy of 3 total kilograms? That is pretty wild. That is, I'm wondering if the math is wrong on this. I'm just looking at the 2.86 kilograms. Real-time follow-up, 2.86 times 2.2 per kilogram. Nope, that's right. Yeah, that's 6.3 pounds. I look at it and I go, man, that's just crazy. How could it be that light? Again, reality thing here, though, is that this doesn't work for every situation or for everyone. Who does this work for? Folks who are going off on weekend trips, folks who are going to rely on the credit card. Going back to our Viola guy, he didn't camp every night. He stayed in hotels an awful lot. In fact, he was just getting over being sick, and he said he was in hotels for days prior to meeting us. So this is a scenario where you're like, the camping situation is more of a if I need to, less that I want to. So it's there if you need it. Who does this not work for? Winter trips, really cold or foul weather situations. I think this could work for you real gung-ho bikepacker types on remote routes. I think for many other folks, it's a remote route just doesn't fly with this type of a thing where there's no services. If you are used to your comfort when you are camping, as I have been, this is not a great setup for that. If you're used to having a fully enclosed shelter, this is not a fully enclosed shelter that I've picked there. It's a ground cloth, so it can ball up and you're on bare ground. You got to be thinking differently about all of this. This is a different type of camping setup. I think that the psychological side of going this minimal is a real question mark. You gain a lot. You get freedom, you get your simplicity, but you do lose your comfort, your margin for error. But boy, oh boy, I tell you what, looking at under 7 pounds of packed weight, this is a fascinating setup. I have not added up how expensive this would be. This particular setup would be remarkably expensive. You do not probably have these things unless you are an ultralight backpacker on hand, and this can get really expensive. So what do? Could you use some of the things you have on hand and add things slowly? Absolutely. Is that going to increase your volume and your weight? Absolutely it will. And so that's maybe for a future episode, is taking this type of an approach, but utilizing the things I have and maybe replacing certain things and finding where are the real weight savings, the cost to weight savings ratio. That's a huge thing in the ultralight backpacking community, I think could apply here. I am curious for all of you who engage in this type of nonsense, this type of adventure travel with your bike. How close are you to this type of a setup? Are you very close? Do you do this? Are you in true bikepacking mode. I think that even for bikepackers, this is even more compact and even lighter than most bikepackers will choose to do. Does this give you ideas? For those of you who are more on the kind of trail riding and the asphalt riding, and you carry more the traditional pannier-based riding, does this even appeal to you at all? I'm just really curious what you do and what you choose when it comes to weight and volume, because this is fascinating to me. And as I close out this season's riding and looking into next year's, I'm going to say this is intriguing to me. Could you do this 2-night tour with only a dry bag? So that's it for the Ultralight Challenge. I think that it is fascinating to me, and we will explore it more, to be sure, in 2026. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.